This is Judaism Unbound, episode 78, Burning Man. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofus.
And we are very excited to be starting a 3-episode series where we're going to be looking at Burning Man, that big event that happens in the desert. And, you know, a lot of interesting things happen. Some of us who are listening know what those things are. Some of us have vaguely heard of Burning Man and don't know what happens there. And some folks may never even have heard of Burning Man. We're going to try to understand more about what Burning Man is today, and we're going to be discussing with our guests what it might mean in terms of Judaism. We had this idea to start examining this question of Burning Man when I visited the Oshman family JCC in Palo Alto, a very dear friend of this podcast, about a year ago. And I ran into so many people out there in Silicon Valley and Northern California that were all getting ready to go to Burning Man. And all kinds of interesting conversations ensued. And I started to have this hunch that this is something worthy of exploration. So we're starting that exploration today with our guests, Alessandra Wollner and John Mitchell. Alessandra, known as Allie, or at Burning Man, she is known on the playa as Lotus, is a writer based in Oakland, California, and for the past 6 years, she has been an organizer of what she calls the Jew-ish Burning Man theme camp called Milk and Honey. John Mitchell, who is known at Burning Man on the playa as Argus, is the publisher of the Burning Man Journal, the Jackrabbit Speaks newsletter, and the Burning Man website. So we're really excited to be talking to John and Allie today. We feel like we've got a real window into Burning Man from some folks that are very highly involved in it, and we're really excited to welcome you to Judaism Unbound. John and Allie, it's great to have you.
Thanks, Dan. It's great to be here.
Well, it's really exciting to have you. I think that for our listeners who probably aren't much familiar with Burning Man other than basically knowing that such a thing exists and it involves burning something, if you could sort of give us some just basic 101, I think that would be a really helpful way to start.
Burning Man is a temporary city in the desert of northwest Nevada that is a coming together of many different tribes of people who all bring what they have to offer to be part of the city. The city is arranged in a circle, which is an important architectural constraint on how everything works. But within this container, pretty much anything goes. The center of the circle is an effigy known affectionately as the Man, who has been built every year in one form or another since 1986, and then burned. And then everything that went into bringing the Man to stand in that place goes home and disappears without a trace. And the event has gradually expanded from a few dozen friends and family members to first a few hundred, and then a few thousand, and now about 70,000 people. And from a one-night affair to an event that's now 8 days long. And it happens at the end of August, beginning of September. And the burn is at the end. So there's this whole week of celebration and creativity. There's tons of music. There's tons of interactive participatory events. There's talks. There's discussions. There's workshops. There's any kind of carnivalesque performance you can imagine. And this all happens for a whole week that leads up to the burn on Saturday night, the biggest Havdalah candle in the world. And then the next day, a participant-created piece known as the Temple is burned at the end of Sunday, and that's sort of the that's sort of the moment the lights come on at the end of the concert. And the next couple of days, everybody goes home.
So, could you give us a little more of a flavor of sort of what goes on? John described sort of like the big rituals, the big sort of aspects of sort of what goes on in terms of the whole camp. But like, what do people do at Burning Man all day long over the week that they're there?
They play is the short answer, and they release and they transform. That can look like anything from doing a spanking workshop. There's like a number of like BDSM and like sex positive things. It could look like jumping around on a trampoline and kind of getting to do things that you might do when you're 5 at like summer camp. It might look like joining a crew that have like megaphones and just yelling insults at people riding by. Or doing a workshop in which you learn to speak gibberish. It could look like dancing all day in booty shorts which is mostly what I do. It could look like doing psychotropic or psychedelic substances, but that is also, I think, a big misunderstanding of Burning Man, that it is just a drug-fueled orgy in the desert. It's not that for some people, but it's very much more. People are climbing on giant sculptures. People are hugging strangers. People are doing crazy acro yoga and aerial silks. People are falling in love with someone new. Their life is imploding. Their relationships are dissolving. They're getting married. A lot of people get married out on playa, actually legally, many of them. It's like anything you can imagine and then some.
We've heard a little bits and pieces of this with John, you mentioning maybe we'll talk about this temple piece. And also I was vibing with the fact that it's 8 days, and I'm thinking of Hanukkah, and I'm thinking of, according to some people, Passover is 8 days, all that stuff. We're talking about this on a show called Judaism Unbound. Clearly Dan and I at least, think there are some clear parallels to maybe religion in general, but also particularly Judaism. And I'd love to hear each of you sort of give your take on what it is about this experience that parallels that which is religious and that which is Jewish.
I completely agree with that. There's no question that a lot of the sensibilities that I would later begin to realize were essential to my Judaism I first encountered at Burning Man, which is not to say that I had not had meaningful Jewish experiences before I went to Burning Man. In fact, the 3 years of college that I had prior to my first burn were the most Jewishly active and involved and alive years of my life to date. But then going to Burning Man sent me spiraling off. There's something just unavoidably aesthetically harmonious between Judaism and any gathering of tribes in a desert. Every mention of dust in Tanakh, every mention of sunrise and the stars and moon, that aesthetic element of spirituality is something. I mean, I think most of the art is fueled by that. Like Allie just said, lots of what people do all day is also fueled by that. But after a few years, the cycles start to sync up. The burn is always at the same time of year. The high holidays are always within a month afterward. It becomes one of the holidays, or one of the festivals, I should say, in an absolutely real sense. And the fact that the burn is on Saturday night has never seemed like a coincidence to me. It has always seemed perfectly natural that the separation between the Holy Week, I mean, it might be a little profane or blasphemous to call it a Holy Week, but I would definitely go there. The separation between the Holy Week of Burning Man and the return home happening on Saturday night with a giant candle never seemed the least bit incongruous to me, even though it was totally unintentional.
But in a way, I think that maybe the impulse that, I'm sort of interested in exploring here is that there's some deep set of needs and the deep set of ways that human beings try to have their needs met. And particularly, right, we a lot of what you described in Burning Man sort of fits with a conception that we have about the time that we spent wandering in the wilderness, or the times when we went to pilgrimage to the temple. And it's sort of, I guess I'm wondering whether to some extent, right, going to Yom Kippur services isn't quite getting at that need for people. And they're playing it out by going to Burning Man, and that feels very Jewishly authentic, but it's actually Jewishly authentic to a previous form of Judaism. And the question then becomes, how do we think about the current or maybe future forms of Judaism after we understand that some of these deep yearnings are being met by Burning Man and not Judaism? So, what would Judaism do, sort of as a corrective once that is sort of deeply discovered? I think that was sort of the impulse that I was feeling, that, when it was, you're right, it was around the high holiday times, and I was seeing, hearing all these people talking about going to Burning Man and not necessarily planning for their Yom Kippur services.
So in 2010, we had a camper named Becca Grumet, who actually wrote a master's thesis on Judaism at Burning Man called Doing Jewish at Burning Man. And so she surveyed not only my camp, Milk and Honey, but she also talked with other burners, and it was kind of ethnographic and also personal. And there was one line, I just reread it last night to kind of get myself thinking for this. And there was one line that she wrote that really reminded me, Dan, of, or resonated with what you were saying, Dan. And it was, what if a high holy days Jew, or one who pleases their parents by finding a free 20s and 30s ticket to a local synagogue once or twice a year, became a Burning Man Jew, instead making an annual pilgrimage to the playa to do something Jewish? While Burning Man is no easy feat and certainly not free, Milk and Honey has already accidentally impacted young lapsed Jews just with the theme of their camp at the burn. If such Jews want to take the connections a step further, there are plenty of desert-dwelling parallels to make. Sukkot connections and Jewish rituals that can happen with the right activation energy on the playa. The notion of a Burning Man Jew, that's funny, and also just in burning for 7 years, it makes total sense to me.
Yeah. I would say for the vast majority of my friends of Jewish descent who go to Burning Man, and I hate these anecdotal things where it's like, well, this is what my friends think, so obviously this is how it is. And in any case, like the Burning Man Jews have tended to find me, and so I've heard a lot of these stories, and I definitely think there is a reconnection to, well, I mean, I don't think it's limited to Jews at all. I think that basically everybody out there has a really intense revisiting and examining of their own identity on a very individual level, but then as part of this very strange gathering of varied tribes of people out there with their own identities, with their own new Burning Man identities. So figuring out who you are is such a huge part of what happens there that I don't think I could name someone from a Jewish background who's been there who hasn't had some kind of Jewish experience there, especially those who hadn't really had what they might call a Jewish experience anywhere else other than, by coercion as children.
With that, this Jewish experience that feels connected and feels resonant, a number of people have something like that at Milk and Honey on Friday night at services, which is our big signature offering. This will be our 10th. We've been on playa for a decade now. And we have over 700 people that come to services by our rough estimate at this point. But a lot of people come for this free meal, I think, and to pay lip service to their tradition or their faith, or they've had a nice connection with someone, a honey, out on playa who invited them, and they want to come for whatever reason to like spit some game or to like, just make better friends. And they are really moved and they're actually shocked. And I wrote a piece for the Burning Man Journal with one of my co-campers and dear friends, Connor Moss, about how Milk and Honey does radical ritual. And there were a number after that article came out, about like 10 people got in touch with me who were strangers and commented on the piece. One of the best comments was like, if services felt like this, we would do this all the time. People who did not expect to feel any connection or pride in their Judaism and don't really connect with it a lot during the year are very moved. But it's not just at Milk and Honey. It just happens to be a high concentration on Shabbat, on Friday night, that happens.
It engages something much more reverent than whatever they did Thursday at sunset. And people come away from it processing something, not simply having heard some music, but there's definitely a sense that what happened there was a more communal experience than simply like hearing some music or singing some songs. There was something that everyone was doing together. And the other evidence that I have for this, actually, Allie, is something that Allie could also speak to, which is that we also both participate in festivals held by an organization based in the Bay Area called Wilderness Torah that has a Pesach and Sukkot festival that has been referred to as the Jewish Burning Man in all kinds of haphazardly written news articles, but I think there's actually something much more interesting than an imitation of Burning Man going on, particularly at Passover in the desert. And what that has proved, I've been going. I missed Pesach in the desert this year. I missed both festivals because I was in Israel all year. But when I go back, it will be my 5th time at Passover in the desert, which is the only thing I've done with this level of commitment other than Burning Man. And the reason why is because it is finally the expression of all of this language that I have had my whole life about where religious experience comes from and where religious community comes from.
I think it's less interesting to like get into the minutia of what kind of resonances or parallels you can find at Burning Man with Judaism. But the point is that there's a satisfaction in like recognition, again, that thing, the return, that like it's all there. Like if you know some stuff about Judaism, like you don't even have to know a lot, but like pillar of fire and pillar of cloud, dust cloud, like Sukkot, we're all under these shade structures that are open walled, wandering around in the desert, literally wandering around in the desert, visiting a temple that gets destroyed. Like there's all kinds of things.
And then we build it again.
You don't wait for the Messiah?
Yeah.
We're the Messiahs.
We are the Messiahs. And so like there's all that. There's something that there's like a finding all of that resonance, and it feels good to resonance, another word with that in it, and so finding all of that is like this super satisfying thing that humans like. It makes sense of things. And so there's that, I think. The getting back to like the roots, the radical thing, feels really good because it feels freer. We feel more alive, and I think the spirituality feels more alive as a result too. The other thing is that like Judaism is such a communal religion. It's so communal. So much of what we do is gathering around table culture or gathering together. Like even, the fact that there is the law that you need 10 men traditionally, but 10 people, let's say, to pray together. So like there are all these ways in which community is built into Judaism, baked into Judaism. And Burning Man, which is such a communal effort, like really reinforces that. And you have to collaborate to survive out there. You're stronger together, and you're also living together, and that feels really good. And there are all these ways in which the togetherness can be reinforced by Jewish ritual. And I say this and highlight it because actually Milk and Honey, we are Jewish. There is a sizable contingent of people that are Milk and Honey campers, honeys, we call them, who are Jewish. I don't know the exact numbers, but we have an over 200-person alumni base at this point for an 80-person camp every year. And we, like, half the camp, maybe more, is not Jewish year over year. There's something about Judaism and these organizing principles of community that feel really good even to non-Jews.
I want to name something that is, I think, pretty clear to everyone, but that we've sort of been skirting around, which is that in addition to all of these beautiful resonances with Judaism and connections, like Burning Man, by the sound of it, is very, very fun. Like I think that's like sort of like we're talking about all of the meaningful things and all of the beauty, and I think that's crucial. But what I'm thinking about, and the reason I bring this up, is that I think a large reason why 70,000 people are showing up there on a regular basis is because this is an incredibly enjoyable series of days. And when I think about the question of like, I mean, there's two ways that we could hear a lot of this if somebody's a listener to this and they're like interested in Jewish life, right? There's all of these people are going to Burning Man. Like, how do we get them to go to Jewish other things the rest of the year? That's like sort of, I think, the level one way that somebody could listen to this. And that's not what I'm most interested in. What I'm most interested in is, okay, Burning Man sounds spectacular. It sounds like there are some really beautiful resonant elements of it that that could easily be connected to Judaism, how does sort of everybody else learn? Like how does Burning Man get exported elsewhere? Is it like, how does the spirit influence the rest of Jewish life?
Well, one other thing we haven't talked about with respect to what Burning Man is like is that it also sucks. It's a lot of fun, but it's also miserable. And like, that's really biblical too. Like, people complaining in the desert is also something that's very Jewish. People complaining anywhere. But the part that's, I think, hardest to export is the part where you go into this place that is trying to kill you all the time in every way. And when you come out the other side of that, you have survived something. And that is very hard to replicate. It's very hard to replicate something with the urgency and the self-confidence that it takes to deal with that situation. And I don't know that it is something. I mean, we at the Burning Man Project spend all day trying to think about how the benefits of these experiences can be exported to as many people on Earth as possible. But so many of the successful experiments in doing that are so finely tuned to the communities and the places where they take root that it almost looks nothing like Burning Man. So I tend to think that the most exportable product of the Burning Man experience is individual human beings who have been activated by it. And the thing that I'm the most optimistic about with respect, well, there's two things that I'm most optimistic about with respect to Burning Man and Judaism. One is the fact that this culture is so second nature to every Israeli that I've ever met that the Burning Man culture there is taking off at a rate that would make the one here unrecognizable in 5 years. So there's something about the people who are coming over here, who came over here 10 years ago or so, and brought what they felt here back to Israel that's transforming that society. And I think that's one really interesting component that I just spent 9 months immersed in. The other thing I spent 9 months immersed in was the third year of rabbinical school for my wife and her classmates, who are conservative rabbinical students at Ziegler in Los Angeles who just spent their third year in Israel. And of the 12 of them, I think, I can't remember exactly how many there are, but 2 of them, my wife included, obviously, are going to Burning Man this year. And neither one for the first time. So the idea that there are people in the conservative movement who are finding the spark of something here at the beginning of their
spark
rabbinate. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't avoid fire metaphors ever, or Kabbalah metaphors. And they're going. My wife Skyped in to Talmud class from the playa a couple years ago. Like she had pink hair and. There was like a horrible windstorm going on outside, and she was Skyping in to Talmud for her first week of class. The future of the conservative movement with these people having been ordained is something that I'm really looking forward to.
I have, from the beginning, felt immediately that Burning Man is the Shabbat of the year. It is a sanctuary in time. Okay, like it is a city that exists for a week of the year. There's no end of work on Playa, like, believe me, I will assure you of that. But it's a whole different kind of labor, like literally labor of love, because so much of it is gifting, than what we're doing in our normal life. And so the way that Judaism happens is like different. It's like on this expansive, spiritual, like exhaley kind of scale that you just don't have access to during the rest of the week or / year. The how do you bring it back, or what do you bring from Burning Man into Judaism? Like, I got back from the playa that first year and I was super electrified, as most people are. And then I wanted to and then it was Rosh Hashanah 2 seconds later. And so I did this giant 60-person Rosh Hashanah in my backyard that had 2 giant long tables, put all the living room furniture outside, and made this tashlich pool in like an empty garden, big square garden box, and made it and had this art installation, and people put tea lights in and put rice paper in and like wrote on their rice paper what they wanted to get rid of, and it would dissolve instead of the breadcrumbs. And so I was really inspired by Burning Man to have this interactive, artistic, experiential way of doing things. Like with tshuva, it's already there that it's experiential, but I just reinterpreted it a little so that it would fit in my backyard where I didn't have like a flowing body of water. But I'd say like the holder of the people who hold the Judaism for Milk and Honey are the ones who step up to lead services every year. And that is different every year. There's usually a committee of 6 people. And so it's not just one person leading services, not just one rabbi even. Like last year, there were no rabbis. And actually one of the people who were leading this past year was not Jewish.
I mean, I'm really fascinated and not surprised at all, actually, that somebody who wasn't Jewish was involved with leading, and that such a high percentage of people who aren't Jewish took part in this camp. Because one thing that we've talked about with a variety of guests is that when something is really compelling Jewishly, it tends to be compelling for other people too. We're not so, like, we are as Jews, there is some level of history and uniqueness for sure, but like we are similar enough to the rest of society that when something is really wonderful and beautiful and spirit-filled for a set of Jews, it's often the case that others are interested. So I love hearing that, and I think that it makes perfect sense given the vibe that you've been describing with Milk and Honey. I did want to bring up, and so this is maybe a delicate question, but I think it's relevant both to Burning Man and to broader Jewish life. And the reason I bring it up is because I've read a few articles about this in the Burning Man context, and probably hundreds in the Jewish context, which is the issue of class and how in a Burning Man context, there's been a lot of discussion in a variety of circles about how this is this sensational, incredible thing, but that perhaps there are issues that arise in terms of who has access to this festival and how it plays out. And in Jewish life at the same time, we're wrestling with that too, because so many Jewish communities have been centering for a long time the voices and the presence of people who are either upper middle class or sort of upper class. And it's not that I'm indicting either Burning Man or Jewish life, but I'd love to hear sort of your thoughts on that, because I figure it's something that comes up in Burning Man circles, given some of the public articles and discussion about it.
Yes, it does. And Burning Man culture is 30 years old. So it is a highly accelerated process of cultural maturation in some ways, but also it's extremely immature in other ways. And this is the conversation about this issue is one of those ways. The culture has matured tremendously in terms of class consciousness and also access, but the conversation has to catch up. And there are certain unavoidable facts about Burning Man, like the fact that it is many hours away from civilization, like the fact that it is that you have to be able to fully provide for yourself and those living with you for the entirety of 8 days, which is an expensive undertaking even after you get there. And that the ticket costs a chunk of change too. There are ways we've addressed all of these pieces, but I don't think that I think that the conversation is finally beginning to move beyond the idea that the event in Black Rock City is the place to measure the health of Burning Man culture and its effect on the world and on the surrounding society. Obviously, we want everyone to go to Burning Man sometime, which is why the regional network of events around the world, of which there are dozens of official events and hundreds of events, including all of the fledgling ones, that's the reason that exists is because we want everyone to be able to get to Burning Man in the broadest possible sense. This is also the reason why our arts department has expanded to include the civic mandate that we have as an organization, where the thing we can bring to the cities and towns of America and of around increasingly every country on earth is the art and the public space that the art creates and the conversation about civic life that is generated by it. And so that's where we and the organization concentrate most of our effort on trying to reach as many people and bring in as many people and enable as many people to participate as we possibly can.
What other outcomes or effects have there been over the 30 years of Burning Man that you sort of track and know about outside of Judaism? And what do you want there to be? I mean, is there a kind of thought about like what's the larger effect that we're trying to have on the world?
Every day. There are several different tracks of this. The kind of inspirational effect that Burning Man has had on the economy in the Bay Area is something with a long storied history. That's not the one that interests me the most. I mean, I think that the more tangible impacts are the ones that the ones that are more tangible to people who need them are the ones that I'm most interested in. And there are any number of angles for it, but the civic arts one is the one that I think is the most compelling, the easiest to describe. When we bring these 40-foot tall, 100,000-pound pieces of art out into the desert, it's the most beautiful canvas ever for a purely aesthetic experience. But when we put it in the square of the town where the artist comes from, they have to reckon with something that they may not have understood about their community and what it produces and what kinds of experiences people had growing up there. And there are tons of stories along those lines. And those have been, there have been, we still haven't really talked about the temple yet. But the temple is the piece that I think has had the most interesting kind of civic healing effect on communities outside of Burning Man events in general. Not just, I mean, there are many regional events that also have temples, but the temple itself has been exported in several places. One of the most interesting civic arts projects of all is the temple that was built in Christchurch, New Zealand, I believe in 2011, but we'll have to check on that. Whenever it was in the wake of the huge earthquake that really devastated that city. And an artist designed a temple using the seismograph of the earthquake. So this wave-like structure that the community built together in the center of town as a way of processing the trauma of that experience. And you know, they wrote their reflections on the impact of the earthquake on their lives on the walls of the temple, just like people do in Black Rock City. And it really changed the city. And there was another temple in London Derry, Northern Ireland, which was actually built by David Best, who is the originator of the temple in Black Rock City, and his enormous crew of experienced temple builders. And there was a whole odyssey there in convincing these traumatized police forces and fire departments and things like that and governments in Northern Ireland to allow a giant fire to be set in the middle of their city. And that was a healing experience. But then the stories of people coming together across formerly violent political lines to build that thing and to have that experience as a community are endless.
So could you tell us more about the temple in Black Rock City?
Yeah. The temple in Black Rock City was created to fill a need that one artist knew was there that had gone unserved until the 2000 burn, which was that there was no place in Black Rock City that was contained enough for people to process overwhelming emotions. The burn of the 90s, particularly the late 90s, was chaotic and overloading in a way that I don't think people of our generation of Burning Man participants can possibly appreciate. There was no sanctuary there. And in 2000, an artist named David Best had lost a loved one and decided to build at the 12 o'clock position of the circle, which is a central position in the part of Black Rock City where there is open desert, kind of opposite the man, a temple to mourn that loss. And it was a huge, ornate structure, unlike many that had been built before in Black Rock City. and people flocked to it immediately and began to leave their own memorials and write memorials on the walls, which became quickly a tradition. And ever since then, an artist has built a temple there. And it has become such an institution that Burning Man Project gives its largest art grant to the temple crew every year, and it's selected through the most rigorous selection process that we have.
They channel sanctity, but in very different interpretations every time. It is definitely a place of release, not solely mourning. A lot of it is mourning. A lot of release looks like mourning, but just like release, and like it is powerfully emotional in there. And the temple especially is the place where if you are really wanting to work with it and you want some shelter within the wildness of the like storm in your heart, that you can go to any time of day.
I'm just continually fascinated hearing about, in particular, the Milk and Honey Camp, and what sounds to me to be just a thriving and special example of what Jewish life can look like in a really creative, fascinating context. And as we're sort of veering towards the conclusion of this episode and like into our future, like I'd love to just hear like what are some of, if you were going to drill down like what it is that makes Milk and Honey so special, and not just like the particular service, but like the camp. What is it like? Because we're trying to figure that out about Judaism more broadly, right? And like if you've got this great micro example, I feel like that could help us as we continue to wrestle with this moving forward.
I love Milk and Honey with such force, and everyone who is part of it, all of the honeys who are part of it. And the thing that when I first came there in 2011, I just knew I was home. And Burning Man would continue to be resonant for me without Milk and Honey, sure, but I know it would be greatly diminished. So what makes Milk and Honey special? I've always really said it very simply, which is that it is a community of people who are very heart strong and mind strong. So they are not just people who have amazing intellectual and capacity and competence, but also have deep feeling, deep authenticity, integrity, and desire to serve and love and show up. And that combination makes for a incredible community that continues on. And because people who join in feel that, they, and also are kind of carefully, they're part of our network. It's always people who know someone who's already camping with us. They're kind of, it's a way for us to like ensure that like people who kind of have the same orientation continue to come in. They like fall in love too. And so I think that certainly translates into how we conduct services or how we hold our space and open when we do invite guests in, or when we invite new campers in, which is that there is great care taken in emotion and heart and intention or intent. And there's also a lot of really smart planning and really like on top of it, well done execution. And so, and people come into our camp and they're like, y'all are so clean, and they're kind of shocked, but it's truly a community. And I definitely credit the communal structures of Judaism with helping us build that strong, cohesive base. But I think I know it nourishes all of us for the rest of the year and helps us helps us get closer to being the versions of ourselves that we admire most and are proudest to be more of the time, which I'd say is something that many burners beyond honeys share.
For folks out there listening to this, I mean, we've got a hugely diverse audience all over the place. What's sort of the key message that you like to leave them with about the power of Burning Man, the power of, Jewish Burning Man, if that's particularly relevant, or whatever it is that you would hope for them to think about as they're, driving to work and listening to us on their radio or whatever it might be?
Burning Man is for you. It is not a counterculture. It is a super culture. And you are there and your people are there. And I hope that everyone finds a place that feels the way Black Rock City feels for themselves and for their people and for their culture. It's one that reminds you why you wake up in the morning every day and why you go to sleep every night. And there are things about an experience that profound that are terrifying, but we know that. Jewish people know that. And we face that. And we remember that on purpose because it is important in our growth to face that. And that's the reason I keep going. It's the reason why everyone I know keeps going. And it's not the reason why most of them go for the first time. But like I've said, Burning Man is not an event. Burning Man is a superculture. And being a part of it is something that can look any number of different ways. Find your tribe and be a part of it and be an active participant in it and an active creator of it, and you're doing it already. And hopefully that means you'll make it out to the big one someday.
Pretty good note to end on. What he said.
Thanks so much for being with us. It's really a great conversation, and we're excited to come to Burning Man someday.
I really look forward to seeing you out there, and I will welcome you with open arms, and I look forward to that tremendously. And it was also a joy to talk to all of you today.
Seconded. We'll see you in the dust.
Absolutely. I hope so. Thanks again to Allie Wollner and to John Mitchell for coming on to this episode of Judaism Unbound. It's been a great conversation. We want to close it out in the same way we always do by encouraging you out there, our listeners, to be in touch with us. And there are a few ways that you can do that. First, you can head to our website, JudaismUnbound.com. Second, you can try our Facebook page, Judaism Unbound. And last but not least, you can hit us up via email at dan@nextjewishfuture.org or lex@nextjewishfuture.org. The last plug we like to make is that you can always support us financially with a one-time gift or a recurring monthly donation. And you can do that at JudaismUnbound.com/donate. So thanks so much for listening. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.